Hello, so welcome everyone once again to another episode of the Time for Impact podcast with myself, Chris Wade, and my co-host is here as well. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Chris. I'm looking forward to another good conversation today.
As always, we try to bring something interesting to each of these podcasts and someone in particular to tell us something that's either innovative or groundbreaking around volunteering and volunteerism. And today we have two guests. So we're double lucky to have two guests here today. We have Rachelle Lazarus and Nicky Goldman from the Jewish Volunteering Network. Welcome, both of you. How are you?
We're fine. Thank you for inviting us.
No, our pleasure. I suppose I always traditionally kick off with the same old questions, which is really getting you to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit perhaps about your journey into volunteering. And one of you, I'm guessing Nicky, will perhaps want to tell us a bit of an introduction into the Jewish Volunteer Network, who you are, what you do, why you're here, etc.
Thank you. So I'm Nicky. I'm the Chief Executive of JVN. I've been in post for around 6 years. I've been involved in volunteering my whole career. Over 40 years working in the Jewish community, always worked with volunteers, and then came to this role, as I say, 6 years ago. I'm working with Rachelle.
Yes. Hi. So I've been with JVN for about 3 years. You know, I think I had a typical story falling into volunteer management, a little bit atypical. I was living in Los Angeles and I was working in music PR. And it was the time just after Steven Spielberg had released Schindler's List. And at that time, what was happening was a few of my friends were working on a project that he was working on, which was to record Holocaust survivors and refugees from Nazi Europe. And my friend phoned me and she said, listen, you're the most Jewish person I know. You need to sort of come and work at this place. So I went and they said to me, have you ever worked with volunteers? And I thought, well, I've volunteered all my life. So the answer is yes. And they said, great, you can be our volunteer manager. So that is how I started in volunteer management.
Wow, that's a story you don't hear every day.
I was going to say, it was actually on the Universal Studio lot. It was quite surreal.
Yeah, indeed. And so, yeah, that's how you got into volunteering. So tell us a bit about the Jewish Volunteering Network.
So JVN started around 18 years ago because we're just celebrating the 18th anniversary. And it came about because there was a woman who was volunteering on what was the Central Inquiry Desk for the Jewish community at an organisation, the Board of Deputies of British Jews. And she kept getting calls, Judy Citron is her name. She kept getting calls from people saying, I'd love to volunteer, but I don't know where. So she was talking to a woman at her synagogue, Susan Winton, and said to Susan, wouldn't it be a great idea to have a website that had lots of volunteering opportunities and then people could go and see all the range of volunteering available. As it happened, a number of years before that, Professor Margaret Harris, who was a professor of volunteering at Birkbeck University, did a piece of research for the Institute of Jewish Policy Research, and she recommended a Jewish volunteer bureau. So Judy got hold of this information about Margaret's work, and the whole thing came together. And they started at a kitchen table. They brought on board the first director, Leonie Lewis, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, and I first came across the network, I think it must have been around mid-2000s, and I was working for victim support, and some of your colleagues came to visit me there to see what the partnerships could be between the two organisations, which was great. Yeah. So, I mean, that's how you formed. What does the network do? Give us a bit of an overview.
So we do three things. We connect volunteers to volunteering opportunities. We support volunteer managers with their volunteer management, and we promote and celebrate volunteering. And we do that. So we promote volunteering in the Jewish community and we promote Jewish volunteering in the wider sector.
Fantastic. Brilliant. I one of the many reasons I invited you onto the podcast is I was inspired. Well, first of all, I had a conversation with you. Then I think only a few weeks later, I read the Community Life Survey data that came out, the most recent one. And in there, what was quite striking was there was a clear link between the Jewish faith and volunteering. And we already know there's a link between faith and volunteering, regardless of the individual religions. But Judaism and Jewish volunteering seems to come up particularly high. And I wondered if you had some insights into what's behind that. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about that.
Well, it's really interesting because I think usually, and Nikki can correct me, that when Jews arrive in a city, the first thing they do is build a cemetery and a mikveh, and those things are usually run by volunteers. So I think historically that when Jews migrated, they created their own infrastructure, which they of course had to then manage themselves. So I think that in order to sort of, if you like, preserve our life and identity, that possibly was the root cause of it. And to a certain extent, I think that is very common. I mean, we are I would say a group of people that both want to be part of a wider community, but also to maintain our own culture, history, religion. And so in order to do that, there are sometimes services or charities that really sort of speak to us, if you like. I don't know if you want to add anything, Nikki.
I think we can also see it back in the Bible, in the Old Testament as well, where the word in Hebrew, nadav, is a donation. So it was all about people giving freely of themselves. So that's been part of our, as Rachelle said, it's been part of our religion, been part of our culture, and been part of our history as well.
And I always get a sense, from the outside, I guess, of real strong communities around Jewish communities, and usually when you get really strong community connections, you get really strong volunteering, and I guess that's probably something that pulls through as well. Is that?
Yes, I think that the Jewish community or members of the Jewish community very often want to volunteer and want to give of themselves, as Rachelle said before, both within the community and outside the community as well, to be part of society and for the greater good.
And I was reading, and forgive me, I'm going to absolutely slaughter the pronunciation, I'm quite sure. But I was reading a little bit, before we spoke about some of the sort of concepts within Judaism, is it, where have I got it here? Gemilut Chassidim, is that right? Anyway, close to the pronunciation.
That was very good. Yes.
You've been very polite.
It's acts of loving kindness, and very much that is a fundamental principle of Judaism, is giving to other people. And the other one we talk about is tikkun olam, which is healing the world, and being part of making the world a better place. It's a really important thing within Jewish religion, culture, history, all of the part that it's our obligation. There was a rabbi who said that when the world was created, that it was broken into lots of tiny pieces, all the fragments of light. And part of our job is to bring together those fragments to create light in the world. So one little act at a time.
It's almost like the acts of kindness, isn't it? And how does that, I mean, beyond volunteering, how does that play out in people's faith or in people's everyday life, I suppose?
I think one of the things I would say is that right now we talk a lot about, I know people say that people are not volunteering in the same way that they did in pre-COVID. But I think that we sometimes forget acts of kindness. And I think one of the things that struck me, not just within our own community, but across communities, is that people generally want to be nice to other people and do acts of kindness. And I think sometimes those acts of kindness are lost. I think they become invisible. And it's something that we talk about a lot at JVN, that, if you stop a minute and look down a street, you'll see people, walking out of the way, opening a door, just doing those small gestures. And I think that acts of kindness are incredibly important. And many years ago, I had an interesting coach. And the first thing she said to me, I was very motivated to have a coach. And she taught me that you have to count the acts of kindness or good things that happen during your day, because if you don't, you'll miss them.
I think that's really profound. I think you said it earlier, Rachelle, and you talked about COVID. I think COVID was a really good illustration of this, how all those what they call mutual aid societies grew up in neighborhoods because people just wanted to help each other. And I think that's really profound. And I also remember when it was the Olympics in London in 2012, apart from the fact loads of people came forward to volunteer and because they wanted to help. on trains, people talk to each other. It was like at that critical time, people just wanted to interact, to be nice, to do nice things together.
They might have just been visiting from the north, though, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah, we're both Northerners, so we know what that is.
But, you'd think that sense of, kindness to others isn't unique to one faithful.
No.
It's something that's pretty universal.
Yes.
Yeah.
But is there something that more secular charities or other faith charities should be learning from those concepts, or generally from Jewish behavior around volunteering? Because there's something to be learned in terms of why those numbers are so much higher in the Jewish community than there are others. I mean, is there something that we all should be learning from that?
Well, I think there is, well, yes and no, to be truthful. Some of the things of that volunteering is within the synagogue. We do find a lot of volunteer, and I'm sure in every faith that we have a rabbi, but we also have people within the community who are very involved in services and leading services and being part of the services. And the word for a synagogue is actually is a beta knesset, which is a meeting house. So many synagogues have community aspects. I'm sure that's also not uncommon. And many of the services and the additional supports of people in the community are provided by members of the community. So, in theory, you at different points in your life, and in fact, even in different points of a week, you can be the beneficiary of something within the community, but you can also be the person who delivers that. And I would say that one of the other things that happens a lot in our synagogue is, of course, we have a high number of volunteers who unfortunately go out and do security. So that is something that is unique within our community. But, we do security of our community buildings and schools, synagogues, and many of us who are members of those institutions, that is part of our volunteering. So unfortunately, that is a uniqueness.
I think the other thing I was going to say was we're really small. The Jewish community in this country is 0.5% of the population. We're 270,000 approximately. So we're tiny. And I think often when you're smaller, then people are seen and they're more likely to want to contribute. Now, also, the other thing to say is not everybody contributes. Everyone who's Jewish wants to contribute or indeed wants to be part of the community. But I think for people who do, then because there are not that many people, they feel an obligation, feel a sense of responsibility. It's their responsibility to step up and do something.
I'm guessing as well that sense of communities, because of the numbers that you talked about, Nikki, is easier in London and other cities where there's probably a bigger community than it is in perhaps rural areas. Do you find it's much harder to get people involved in volunteering away from the big sort of centres of population, or does the whole concept just follow through anyway, regardless, and perhaps they're more involved in volunteering in more secular environments as a result?
So I think in smaller Jewish communities, if you live in a place where there's not a very big Jewish community, you tend to then by default become very involved within the community if you want to keep that community going. And I would say certainly one of the things that happens sort of in certain communities is the advent of technology. And technology across all faiths and communities has revitalized volunteering. So what we see now, certainly with telephone befriending, is that there are charities that we work with that once upon a time, if you wanted them to have a befriender, it would have to be somebody local. Now they can have somebody from their own community who online will phone them or Zoom with them. We find that smaller groups tend to join groups online. I mean, technology has really completely revolutionized the ability for people to reconnect, certainly with their faith. And we hear a lot about it within our networks. Yeah. So it's kind of changed for the better.
Yeah.
It seems like that technology piece has kind of potentially moved or enabled that sense of community to sort of be potentially something a bit different or have a different spin on it. It doesn't have to be rooted in a geographic basis anymore. It could be a faith-based community, or it could be an interest-based community, or it could be and I've seen lots of organizations tap into that actually quite successfully to try and bring people together who are not close together geographically, but are close together in other aspects of their lives, or to enable people to feel less isolated. That feels quite important. It enables people to be active and participate even when you're not or living nearby. It's not all about place, I suppose.
Because there are different denominations within Judaism. So for the Reform and Liberal communities, they have made great use of technology. And exactly what you're saying, Matt, is that people can join in their services from a distance, and they don't have to be geographically connected. Whereas in Orthodox synagogues, we don't use technology on Sabbath or on festivals. So you do have to live nearby, and many people don't travel on the Sabbath. So you do have to live in local areas if you want to be part of an Orthodox community and you are personally observant.
But I guess it also labels a bit of is intersectionality the right word? But, again, because technology enables smaller communities,
Yes.
smaller subsections of communities to get together. Whereas, within a geographical area, you may have very few people, but I don't know, it could be a Jewish and a school teacher, and it could be as simple as that. But, actually, you would only have so many of them in an area. But if you bring in technology over a wider geographical area, even beyond country borders, of course, you actually can have some real interesting sharing of learning, for instance. And I suppose that brings us to some kind of volunteering and Judaism as well. You can bring groups together that perhaps you wouldn't do before around a cause.
Yeah.
So, very passionate about a cause, but equally I'm Jewish. I want to speak to other Jewish people who are passionate about this cause, which may not be practical, I guess, before we had all these wonderful technologies.
Yeah, we recently had our volunteer awards, and one of the charities, they look at they're interested in supporting the Jewish community in Belarus. And one of their volunteers flew in from Massachusetts to join us at the awards. He had been researching his own family history, found this charity based in London, supporting this community based in Belarus, and he volunteers with them. And he came to our awards. It was, as you say, very much his own identity, because he was curious about his own family, and then found this charity that was able. So he volunteers across countries, and it was really lovely to meet him and hear his story.
That sounds really interesting. I wonder if it might be a nice opportunity for you to tell us a bit more about your awards and some of the ways you celebrate and recognise the contribution of volunteers.
We believe that everyone should be celebrated. So the way our awards run is that we ask our charities, the charities in our network, to submit their charities winners each year. So they submit their charities Volunteer of the Year, Volunteer Team of the Year, Young Adult Volunteer, and Lifetime Achiever. Everyone who's submitted gets a trophy at the awards. So this year we had 103 winners from 53 different charities. So 53 different charities had nominated within those 4 categories. So everybody is a winner. Everyone is celebrated at the event. What also happens is that we have an independent judging panel, and they take all the submissions beforehand in each category, and they choose an outstanding winner in each category. So nobody knows till the night or till the afternoon who is going to get those outstanding awards. So it's a very special, heartwarming event each year.
Lovely celebration of community and of volunteering. It sounds nice.
And it's important when we have people from all around the country, and again, not just charities within our community. And then there are, of course, charities within our network who may have been established. Some charities were established by the Jewish community for the Jewish community, but some were established by the Jewish community for outside the community. So there's a real mix in that space, and of people coming together and learning. And actually, we've also seen opportunities, as always, for networking and cross relationship building, because charities that didn't know about each other will say, oh, that's very similar to what we do, and can we have a coffee sometimes? So it's very much a very joyous, and it's a fantastic afternoon. You should come one time.
Yeah,
I think that was January. An invitation.
Right. I think it would be lovely if you came.
With pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
It's great to hear, though, because recognition and celebration is so important, and it sounds like you have a very interesting and quite innovative way of doing that, actually, how you make everyone feel worthwhile. I think, having been involved in various different forms of volunteer awards over the years in different organizations and different settings, I always worry a bit with that like the intention is good, but a lot of the versions of that I've been involved in, ultimately a small number of people get recognized, but there is a fantastic contribution made by lots of people. And it sounds like you've sort of cracked a way of being able to have awards whilst reaching a broad base through recognition, which might be one for others to think about. If you're someone that's like me, that's going, how do we celebrate more people, or how do we do awards but making everyone feel like their contribution is valued, sort of thing. It's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? Like, recognition itself to some extent means you need to single people out, but equally everyone's contribution is different and often feels like everyone's contribution is worth singling out in some shape or form.
It was interesting. A few people unfortunately couldn't join us on the day, and we were discussing that we still wanted them to have their moment because their charities had thought enough of them. So I've been going to, if you like, their charities to give them the trophy and to have their moment. But actually more interesting has been is I've taken the words that the charity has said to describe the volunteer, and it's actually the words, because they all say, well, I don't deserve this trophy. But when they hear how their volunteering has impacted not just the charities but the beneficiaries, but also the team. So it's interesting. They've all said to me, can I have the words? So the trophy is here, but it is that sentiment of how people make a difference. And I think people enjoy doing good things for people. It gives them a sense of I don't think it's your own internal pat on the back. But you so sometimes in the chaos of life, if you do something, good deed, even sometimes for the not the best reason, and you see someone benefit, it's a moment of pause and reflection. I should do this more often. That's, if you like, the joy of volunteering. Even if you're not always doing it with a good heart, at the end of it, you can see the impact and say, I'm glad I did this.
We also want to use the awards as an opportunity to inspire other people. So we live stream it, and we hope that people, their friends and family, will be inspired to themselves to do something in the year ahead.
Yeah. Although it's about individuals, in some ways, it's also a celebration of the collective effort, isn't it? And actually a pause and reflection for that collective effort. And I think we don't probably do enough of that in the volunteering world as we should. And because as an organisation you work across organisations, I think there's something extra special as well about the fact that you're involved in volunteering in its many, many guises in many, many organisations. And I think that's, so I'm looking forward to the invite. Thank you very much.
With pleasure. I'm making a note. I think going back to the digital conversation, though, I know that Reach Volunteering do a lot of their work online digitally, and their numbers have been
brilliant.
fantastic over the last year. A shout out to Janet, to Reach.
Yeah, Janet was a previous guest on here. Janet was a previous guest on here.
Right. So I think that for people who want to volunteer in person, Rachelle's right. But I also think, as Matt said earlier, the digital side of things, the online side, means that people can volunteer more at a distance. If I might add into this as well, what can people do? I think they need to be welcoming. I think they need to be welcoming and inclusive. And the other pieces that Rachelle and the team speak about a lot is flexibility, is that almost everybody now is talking about flexible volunteering, that people who want to volunteer want to do it around themselves, around their schedules, around their needs, and it's much more volunteer focused than charity focused now. And so if charities can be a little bit more flexible about what they need, or if they can have projects which are time bound, beginning particularly for younger volunteers, for young professionals, that's what they want. People in their 20s, early 30s, they probably don't want to join a committee forever or get involved in something that's going to require them being in person once a week. They might be able to, if they can do it maybe after work, but they also might not.
Sure. And some entry level opportunities rather than headlong into 5 hours a week, 24 hours a day.
For young volunteers, we've done a lot of micro volunteering projects to do that. And that's been very well received because it makes, those acts of kindness, those small, impactful volunteering, builds relationships with charities. And I think that actually one of the things that we would say is look on volunteering, volunteering is a marathon, not a sprint these days. So if you find someone, and they do something, thank you, keep them involved, and then see what's right for them. I would say the biggest challenge now for all charities, regardless of faith, regardless of where you are geography, is that volunteer management takes a lot more time than it used to. You really have to invest time and emotion in your volunteer. And I think, to go back to your point with Chris, is in a community, in a faith community or in a small community, it's easy to do that. And also because there's a level of, people, for example, if you go to a synagogue or if you're in a faith group, you usually know someone who's benefited from that charity or that organization, so that you have an awareness and an involvement. And it's not necessarily self-interest, but it is about thinking, well, if I want, that charity to be there, then I have to, invest of myself into that charity or financially. So I think that's something that faith-based charities do have, that, if you like, that edge, because if you want that charity to be there, if not for you, then for your family, you have to make an effort or a commitment.
I was interested, sort of going back, just to go back one step, about the sort of different ways people are volunteering now and the sort of the flexibility idea. And I wondered if that would be a good opportunity to talk about your ad hoc squad. It seems like you've got some sort of tools and approaches that are quite innovative and are quite sort of, they're different ways to sign people up, to get people involved into, you've got some, I've been looking at your website. You've got some quite sort of traditional kind of style opportunities, but you've got some quite innovative, like different stuff as well. And I'm sure people listening will be interested in some of that.
So, I mean, yes, event volunteering, for example, is a fantastic way to do ad hoc. It's usually on an evening or on a weekend, so it fits in with people's lifestyle. It's usually complete, it's usually impactful. So we find that there are people that say, I want to go help at that charity golf day, or I want to help at that concert or that talk or that sporting event, because I care about that. Actually, sometimes caring about the charity is not necessarily the rider in that case, but it's much more about the fact that you will do a complete thing on that day. But if you can bring a friend, which is another thing that we do encourage, we say to people all the time, bring a friend and help at this event, then it's a double win. I would say that it's interesting. We do have an ad hoc squad, and then we have our database. And sometimes if there's a particular role, we'll promote it to both. And you'll find that your regular database is as likely to say yes to that volunteering opportunity as those people who are in your ad hoc squad. So although it exists, actually the roles are often filled by, a broader set of people. I would also say that one of the things that we've been doing this year is family volunteering within our community.
Right.
And so we have a very strict, if you like, criteria, which is that the charity that we work with has to have a real need. So it can't be made up, So one opportunity was that there was a garden with a charity that we work with for people with learning difficulties, and it was a green garden. It had no flowers, and they thought, wouldn't it be nice to have flowers? So we were very fortunate. One person in the group sort of found flowers to be donated. We found a community of people, of families. We said there should be no more than 5 families. The project lasts 2 hours. The people who live in the home have to be present, so that the children, for example, engaged with the beneficiaries. And basically it was fantastic because the kids came, they helped with the digging, they saw the happiness that it brought the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries, or the people who lived in the home, were just delighted to see their garden come alive, and they saw it. They saw everybody had a real experience. And it was 2 hours on a Sunday, so that everyone then could go on with their lives, their homework, shopping, visiting relatives. And we've done that a few times around that kind of relationship. And it's been really very, very successful.
The other thing that we did last year was a young adult volunteering program where we curated 3 specific opportunities for a group of young adults, young professionals, people in their 50s, so they could volunteer together, which worked well. We had funding for that, which we don't have anymore, so we're not doing it in quite the same way. But we do want to look to see how we can curate these opportunities for young professionals, maybe in a slightly different way.
Yeah. And I would just like to say, pick up something from that project, which was one of the things that we did, was we asked the participants to define the charities that they wanted to work with. So, and they weren't what I would call legacy charities within the community or roles that you would think. They wanted to be help, yes, in the community, but also outside of the community. They wanted to help with homeless and with refugees. Many had refugee family background. So it was interesting. The other thing I would say about volunteering is that causes and passions and charities always change because we change. So, that's something that certainly in the last 2 years, certainly post-COVID, I've been much more aware of, that our interests have changed.
It's really interesting you use the word sort of curate there to talk about opportunities, and that's something that Chris and I have been talking a bit about, and Chris has done some writing about as well in the past. Like, I suppose to pick up on that, like how did you go about designing some of those opportunities? I'd just be really interested in the approach to that, how you got from, nothing to a volunteering product there. Like how did that come about? What was your process? Is there anything others can learn from that?
Well, we knew we wanted to target young adults, so that was our target group, if you like, for this. And as Rachelle said, we asked them what they were interested in. So based on their feedback, we created these 3 different opportunities. We also did, though, put in a couple of things of our own. First of all, we put in a social activity because we thought that'd be nice for people to socialize together. But we also put in an introduction to trusteeship session. And we got a group of 3 young trustees to come along to meet the group and to talk to them about being a trustee. So I think that was a great thing to do. Whether any of them take that up or not at this point, nevertheless, you're opening up the whole notion of trusteeship to a much younger demographic.
But I think going back to your question about curating, we do it a lot, actually. We work with charities, and sometimes if they're struggling to find people to connect into them, then we find just different ways of, it is effort, but it's kind of, again, it's promoting that charity to a different audience. One of the things I would say, and I think that it happens a lot, is that people have often an idea of what a charity does. If you've only been to a charity once and you think, oh, well, that charity, they just look after dogs, or they look after gardens, you don't always see the range. And sometimes we can use the volunteering that we curate to show people that the charity does way, way more than you think. And I think that that's something that a lot of people fall into, that trap, that they think they know what a charity does, but they actually have no idea.
Yeah. I was interested in what you were saying as well about, well, you sounded surprised, but I don't think you was surprised that there are people who are sort of you advertise an ad hoc opportunity and then your regular volunteers get involved in that, because I think we all see it, and I'm sure you've seen it over many years as well, but actually the people who are engaged or have an affinity with a cause or engaged in volunteering as a concept will get involved in lots of ways. But it's us as organisations who put hats on them and say, this is a regular volunteer, this is an ad hoc volunteer, this is a campaigner, this is a donor, this is a fundraiser. But actually, my sense, and this is back to community, is that one of our roles as volunteer managers is to build communities of people who buy into what we're trying to do, as simple as that, and then provide the opportunities for them to engage in ways that suit them. And it feels to me that you've been doing some of that. We often, Matt and I, we talk about these things. We talk about ladders of participation and different ways of sort of advertising opportunities for people to get involved. But many charities I do talk to, and I'm sure you come across that, are still quite rigid in the offering that they give. Back to your comments about flexibility, Nicky, I suppose, we need volunteers to do X, Y, and Z. Often just X. X is usually quite a big, meaty, high commitment activity that many people would love to do, but they're a bit nervous of getting really involved in that in an organisation they've just met. So I wonder what your reflections are on how you help the volunteers that you're in touch with, or help the organisations who take on the volunteers you're in touch with, to offer a range of opportunities tailored to meet their aspirations, I guess.
One of the ways we do it is we run an annual conference for volunteer managers and CEOs of charities in our network. And our theme, can't remember which year it was, 3 years ago, was Gen Z. And if you want to engage Gen Z in volunteering, this is what you need to hear.
Yeah.
So, and then last year it was all around flexibility. And if you want to engage volunteers, yes, you may not want to do it in a different way, but actually you need to. If you and that's what goes back to what I said before about being volunteer-led rather than charity-led now. So we do talk to them. Rachelle is the most fabulous charity engagement and volunteer manager, and she works really, really closely with the charities. And Rachelle is brilliant at telling it as it is. So sometimes she just says to them, you just need to do it.
And in the long term, it's better for them. It is a long game. It's not about just filling spaces in your roster. It's about building a community, surely.
Well, it is sometimes. I mean, we do a session about recruiting. It's actually officially called how to write the perfect role advert. But what I basically say to people is you can't rely on just a static website anymore. You have to use a whole range of mediums to attract people. And sometimes you have to be bold. I always quote, we had someone from TikTok, Ilana, who came to talk about using TikTok. And lots of people in the room were like, saying, God, we can't use TikTok. We're not TikTok people. And it'll be terrible. It'll be a disaster. And she literally said, well, so what if it's not very good? She didn't use that word. It's gone the next day. Like you're overthinking. And so when I say to charities now is that why don't you think about making a short film about your team so that actually people buy into your team, who you are. You just have to use so many different ways to find roles. And I have looked at some of, one of the charities was complaining that they didn't get any. Was complaining they don't get many roles filled. But when I looked at the role, they wanted people in their 20s, but they were advertising, we need them Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I said, well, how many 23-year-olds are free Monday to Friday, 9 to 5? And it's sometimes, when some volunteers, they're working so hard that they just don't always realize that they need to adapt and change. They're just, and I think that what we're trying to do, what we are able to do, because we often have relationships with our charities, is to able to phone them and say, now, hang on a minute, let's take a moment to look at that role advert. Let's take a moment to look at that social media post. Is it really going to attract who you want?
We love volunteer managers. We think they do the most phenomenal job. It's such a difficult job. All the things they have to do, often part-time roles.
Yeah.
And so anything we can do to support them, to help make their lives easier, we want to do.
Yeah. I've said it many times, but I've never met a volunteer manager who's not incredibly busy.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem. We often can't carve up time for themselves to really step back and think, and do the recruitment is a marketing exercise. Volunteer management is a curation exercise, but often we get just stuck in the doing of whatever's in front of us at any one moment. We need to have more volunteer managers, more resources, so they actually can do a more rounded job. We need to invest in it.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to, again, when you're part of a community, I remember you can sometimes, where people are, if that makes sense. So I remember once I needed a volunteer to help run a conversational Hebrew class on a Thursday morning. So I literally went up and down the street near me, looking and listening for someone who could speak Hebrew. And I figured if they were there on a Thursday at 11 o'clock, they could run a group because they weren't working. And I found a volunteer. So I think that sometimes it is about taking, just having. It was a risk. It wasn't a risk, really. I knew that you can do that. You can sometimes, within a faith group or within a community, where to look for people. Can't hide from you. In fact, I just like to say Leonie, who was the first CEO, unfortunately, when after she died, people would come and tell me that Leonie found them an ideal volunteer role, which they love. And I go, oh, she was such a special lady. And then they'd go, I wasn't looking for a volunteer role. But Leonie found a role right for me. And I think that that's something that the power of being asked by the right person who knows you for the right role is something that is very special. And I think that volunteer managers often do that very well within their own volunteer circle.
I think there's a role for like sort of community leaders in that space as well. I think in terms of that, it's really interesting. Like when I used to deliver quite a lot of volunteer management training, often to volunteers themselves. And I used to do this sort of exercise, it was basically to demonstrate like that sometimes people can get a bit skeptical about recruitment, right? And recruitment strategies. And the point of the exercise was basically to sort of prove to everyone that all of this room full of volunteers, they'd all come from somewhere. There'd been a point when they hadn't volunteered, and then there was a point now where they did volunteer, and something moved them from a person who didn't volunteer to a person who did volunteer. You get all sorts of interesting stories out of that about sort of some of the things that worked and some of the things that didn't work. But kind of consistently, without fail, there would always be a version of people pointing at people in the room going, it's their fault, basically. It's their fault I'm here. And it's that sort of, those kind of activators within the community, those people who persuade other people, those people who lead other people, those people who convince other people either to get started in the first place or to give a bit more or to try something different or to give people confidence. And you know, that's the real sort of secret ingredient of all of this, which is like good people doing good things and being a community leader. And like if we invest as volunteer managers in more of that, actually some of that looks after itself, because you can, like, good people bring people in, don't they, sort of thing. And that's a really, certainly in my experience anyway, it's a really powerful and positive thing to see.
Absolutely. People bring people. That's what it is. Yeah, that's the important thing in all this. And by the way, also, just when I said we run this conference for volunteer managers and CEOs, part of it is so CEOs understand the importance of volunteering in their organization. Not that they don't, they might say it, but we want them to really understand what the challenges are and what the issues are and how they, as leaders of that charity, can play their part in bringing on more volunteers.
That's great. I wanted to ask about the impact of the conflict in Gaza, in Israel and beyond at the moment, and what that means for volunteering within the Jewish community in Great Britain and Irish and beyond.
October the 7th had a massive impact, not just on Israel, and not just on the Jewish community in this country, but on Jewish communities all over the world, and has continued to do so. And, you know, the silver lining in this cloud from our perspective is that more people have come forward to volunteer because they want to do something. When everything else is out of their control, the one thing they can control is their own actions. And so we've had an upturn in people coming to us for volunteering roles. In fact, since we started monitoring placements in 2017, in 2023-24, so from October 23 to September 24, we had the most placements in that time that we've ever had. And that was more than COVID as well.
That's presumably also driven by an increase in demand for support.
So in those 3 months, the Community Security Trust had 1,000 people that came forward because people were genuinely concerned about the security of people they care about.
The anti-Semitism that's been unleashed since October the 7th in this country has been really frightening for many people. And so joining CST may have been one way of doing it, but also volunteering within the community. If they were having issues at work, if they're working in the wider world, then, and perhaps they have to hide who they are and how they feel, then if they volunteer in the Jewish community, at least they feel that they can be understood and there's going to be no issues.
So it will mean that some people will feel less welcome in non-Jewish volunteering roles and non-Jewish organisations, because I suppose sadly the charity world and the volunteering world, like any other part of society, has its elements of anti-Semitism and racism. But it's a shame because it feels like the circumstances break down the fantastic integration, of course, but also the fantastic contribution that Jewish people make to secular volunteering in this country. And
coming back to some of the things we talked about earlier in the podcast about the fact that, like, volunteering is like acts of kindness, right? Somewhere in this is like, actually, if there are acts of kindness going on, hopefully there's a role for volunteering to play somewhere in challenging people to think differently, challenging people to be kinder to each other, modeling that. And my experience of volunteering has been, it's always challenged my assumptions. It's always encouraged me to think differently. It's made me meet new people. It's made me sit down and listen to people, and in a way that other things don't, right? I hope that volunteering has a role to play in sort of positive aspects of this as well, somewhere along the line. If that is, you know, if through acts of kindness we can be kinder to each other. And yeah.
Rabbi Sachs, who was an eminent Jewish philosopher and a former chief rabbi of the United Synagogue, said many things around volunteering. He wrote a book called To Heal a Fractured World, which was all about how people should give and do good things. And he said the greatest gift is to be able to give. So that was very much his message. And he also said the Jewish community could not exist for a day without its volunteers. So it's very much an part of our being, and hopefully, as we're saying, will help to make the world a better place and move us on to better times.
This is, I sometimes say to the charities that we work with, there's a time of the year when each of them may have a situation that needs urgency. And, we say that when you have your urgency, to share that message, because people will step up. Now, you can't have emergency every week, but, like at Christmas, crises at Christmas, services are closed, and people feel that, and they want to make sure that at that time of the year, vulnerable people are supported. So there is something, to what you said, which is fundamentally when people see that there is a need, they want to step up, and roles that they would never have done normally. I know that when the refugees came from Afghanistan, we had people, where can we go pack clothes? Well, 3 weeks before, they would never have packed clothes. But when they saw those people coming, they said, where can we go? What can we do?
Yeah, and when there's a flood, we see the same things.
Yes.
And I hope we always do.
Yes.
We'd all like to see the back of the situations that cause those responses, but it's at least we can celebrate human behaviour when those things do happen, and we all rally around, and volunteering comes to the fore in its greatest strength, I think, in those situations. Well, it's been fab having you on the podcast.
Thank you.
What a lovely, deep conversation and celebration, hope of not just Jewish volunteering, but of volunteering in general. And it's clear what an amazing job you do as a network, bringing those people together, educating in a very gentle way, advising and coaching people to improve their volunteering practice, and celebrating volunteering where you see it through your awards and so on. So thank you for sharing that with us. If people want to hear more about your organisation or to get in touch, how would they do that?
Well, they can start off with our website, which is www.jvn.org.uk, or email Rachelle, RACHELLE @jvn.org.uk.
And hopefully you'll join us at our awards next year.
Well, I'm looking forward to the invite. And if people want to find you on social media, you've already told us you're on TikTok and Instagram and all the usual
we're not
places.
on TikTok. We're not
Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn.
Yeah, we'll find you there. Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing a bit of your evening with us, and for sharing information and some insight into the work that you do. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Take care. Have a good evening.
So, Matt, that was the Jewish Volunteering Network. What were your reflections on what you've heard this evening?
So I was particularly inspired tonight, or one of the things I'm going to leave thinking about is recognition, actually, which wasn't something that I knew much about with respect to the Jewish Volunteering Network coming into this call. But I'm really interested by their approach to recognition and volunteer awards. What was there? Something like over 100 awards given out at their awards, some sort of quite broad-based recognition. Yeah, I'm really excited by that, and perhaps interested to go along in the future and see how they do it. What are some of the things that you're leaving thinking about?
Obviously, it was good to hear some of the cultural and faith and religious-based aspects of the work they do, to understand a little bit more about the drivers behind volunteering from a Judaism perspective. So that was great. I was just generally impressed on how they kind of very gently, it felt to me, bridged the gap or bridge between volunteers within the community and organizations, whether they be within the Jewish community or outside, and how they having conversations with those individuals to try and help shape volunteering to obviously Jewish people's needs, but modern ways of thinking within volunteering. And it was good to hear that. It's good to hear how progressive they are in that area.
It certainly seemed to be a theme tonight that's like, I don't think it was called out necessarily specifically as we talked, but like being quite focused on your audience and trying to develop and shape opportunities with them to develop the kind of things they're likely to want is key, right? And I think that's something that, certainly volunteering professionals I've spoken to or engaged with over the years, I think it's something we all know is important, but sometimes it's hard to sort of walk the walk with that as well as talk the talk with it. So like, what does it actually mean to kind of bespoke opportunities or to work with aspects of community to design things? It seems to me from some of the conversations tonight, it means like actually doing things differently. It means engaging and involving people and designing stuff. Like it's not just rolling out the same thing. It's challenging some of your assumptions about the kind of offers you're putting on.
Yeah. And I thought overall, as human beings, I just was really taken how great advocates Nicky and Rachelle were for both volunteering, but also for volunteer managers and volunteerism, and how they really understood the plight and the challenges of volunteerism. And it was heartening to hear. So, yeah, another good episode.
Thanks, Chris. Look forward to the next one.
Yeah. And if you've liked what you've heard, please share it with at least one other person. It's word of mouth that really gets us noticed. And hope you listening again soon. Thanks then.